All right, boys. So today we have an interesting video that's been found for us. It's talking about Hive Cities. Could they become a reality, or are they just straight into fiction? Right? Like, if you don't know what Hive City is, basically, I think probably the most seen example of it in the modern day is probably like the Warhammer, like 40k universe. There's probably is other examples as well, obviously, but yeah, the hive cities are a massive thing. Like they're giant cities with multiple layers just building on top of each other, basically. But I won't go into too much detail because I'm sure Dammy Lee will probably explain it at the start of this video. So let's crack on with it, shall we?
So a lot of you requested that we look into this absolutely mind-boggling fictional place called Hive Cities. It's a
It's
massive
interesting
multi-level
concept.
structure that contains anywhere from billions to tens of billions of people
Mm.
in these dense, layered communities. At the top, you have the elite, and below, and even further down into this underhive, people are reduced to their most primal forms, suffocating and fighting for survival. The more I
Yeah,
look at it,
it's
it
an
reminds me
insane
of a
concept,
living
honestly.
organism, a sick, parasitic, cancerous
Oh.
organism that feed off the planet while the people feed off the city and off each other. The
That's an
architecture and
interesting way
humanity
of
are
looking at it.
intertwined in this disturbing, endless cycle of growth. It's almost a caricature of a dystopian city, but it
Mm.
makes you wonder, is this architectural construct completely fictional? Or does it show a glimpse of what humanity is capable of when it's forced to think about nothing but survival? A portion of this video is sponsored by Opera.
It's
Hive
honestly
Cities
an
is from the
interesting
universe of
concept.
Warhammer 40k, and they're
Ah,
set on
whatever.
these planets 40,000 years into the future. And it paints a picture of a society that's pushed to the extremes. First of all, there's this constant war between factions that just never ends. It's also sprawling with factories that's spewing out toxins, and it's extremely
Mm.
dense, and there's just not enough resources. But the population just keeps growing, and as it grows, they have no choice but to keep building taller because they're
I don't know if this will be mentioned, but I have always thought when the mention of hive cities in Warhammer and like concept of them building on top of each other, like surely that can't be structurally safe, right? Because w- with the pressure that would then build on the bottom parts, right? If they collapse, the entire thing would come down, right? Unless I guess it's we don't fully see the architecture, so maybe there's stuff to stop that happening, but. You'd logically think that the entire thing would crumble down if the bottom went, right?
constrained by the wastelands around the perimeters. A lot of the resources we looked at compare Hive City to this idea of an arcology, which is a blend of architecture and ecology. The movement started in the
Uh,
60s by an architect called Paolo Soleri. In essence, it's the concept of this self-sustaining, high-density city that's contained in this single megastructure. They would have everything you
hmm.
need in a city, like homes, shopping malls, entertainment, schools, or food production. And by
It sort of, in a way, reminds me of what's it called? Like, there's a plan in Saudi Arabia to basically make like in the desert, make this giant, really long like area living, right? Basically to have two walls. You'd be living in an area between two walls in a sense, and on the outside of the walls, basically they'd cover it with just like solar panels to be able to then give power to the thing, and then you'd basically have districts because obviously the gap between the walls would still be significant, right? But you'd have these giant buildings where within them, which you just basically live in a tower which has all of your entertainment in it, all of your shopping and residency and stuff like that. Like Hive City sound like it basically sounds like an alternate version of a Hive City in a way.
compacting everything into a single structure, it could be very efficient and also have a very low environmental footprint.
Hmm.
This is one of the few attempts at building it in real life. And although
It doesn't look
Arcologies
much.
was a really cool place, in the end, it's a very small community of 100 people, and it
Hmm.
doesn't come nearly as close to the original vision of a city that evolves and functions as a living.
I'm presuming scaling up probably is actually really hard with this sort of thing, right? You probably get to a certain like number of people, probably like they said, like couple of hundred, and it probably gets really hard to scale up into the thousands, tens of thousands, and so forth. I can imagine that's where the issues come in. Like, I just don't think we have structures that can maintain themselves and be safe that are that big, right? Currently, anyway.
Have seen this building. It's the New Orleans Arcology habitat, aka NOAA, and it's kind of the poster child for this movement. In addition to being an arcology, it's a response to the rising sea level, so it's a floating arcology designed to host
Floating.
40,000
Oh,
people.
interesting.
This is the Shimizu Mega City Pyramid, and here we have Crystal Island by the architect Norman Foster, who also designed this building. But most of these projects never became a reality because it's too complicated and expensive.
That's what I was thinking.
But when you look at the grand vision of arcology, Hive City does have some parallels. It's high density, it's self-sustaining, all inside this single megastructure. But it's the dystopian version. And the ironic part is, in Hive City, it's the structure that actually leads to a lot of the problems. For example,
that's what I was thinking.
all the rich people, they live at the top, and the rest, they live at the base. And these poor humans, they live, or they survive, in this underhive. Apparently, they're also forced to consume water and food that trickles down from the
Bro, like in Warhammer, they have this stuff in Hive Cities called corpse starch, if you didn't know. And basically, it's literally just people who have died also in the like have also died, basically just then processed into this like sort of starchy protein food, which you get in a can. It's pretty fucking crazy, bro. Warhammer 40k is just a mad universe, bro. I'd never, I, I can't imagine anyone would ever want to live in that universe, honestly.
the top that's been recycled like 1,000 times. It does make recycling sound kind of sinister, doesn't it? So in Hive Cities, the structure itself is what leads to this massive divide between the classes, and it turns things that should be a basic human right, like light and fresh air, into luxuries. But I think it actually addresses an inherent issue.
That's it. This is it. This is what I was on about earlier. The line, like, yeah. So like, this is
some of these new
straight up what I was on about.
projects.
Yeah, this is the thing, bro. That's what I was thinking of.
That's currently under construction in Saudi Arabia. We see a similar situation. It's an entire city.
I was not expecting this to actually come up in the video.
500 meters tall, but that means the people at the lower levels could have little to no access to daylight, naturally creating the social divide. Also, Hive Cities lead to a complete ecological collapse from the massive toxic output from the factories. So it's kind of the opposite of Arcologies in that regard. But I think the biggest difference is the growth, which Arcology doesn't really address. It kind of assumes that the population size is going to stay the same, contained in this single structure for hundreds of thousands of years. Or maybe it's design.
Well, it's plausible though, right? Because you'd have like some governing body most likely for these sort of buildings, and if they don't want to grow the population, they can easily set it so it is at a certain amount, by restricting generations of how many children they can have, right? And stuff like that, right? Making sure the population stays between two different points, so then it doesn't collapse, nor does it become an abundant. And you can quite easily do that if it's highly regulated, though, right? You just want to have the problem that you wouldn't want to have the rules being too strict, but also like being free to change them every now and then, because you wouldn't want to end up in a scenario where you restrict everyone to like one child for life, and then you end up with like a population deficit like we're seeing with a lot of countries nowadays, because that just became the norm, right?
More for the short term,
none
like
or
50
like
years.
one kid.
But in that case, is it really sustainable? I'm playing.
Oh, ad. We love the ads, don't we, boys? Every time. Always the ads, man.
There's a concept in architecture that's a direct response to rapid and unregulated growth: metabolism. It started in Japan in the 1950s when Tokyo was dealing with a huge influx of people migrating to the city after the war. To try to solve this problem, a group of Japanese architects proposed a pretty radical solution. It looks at the city as a living, evolving organic system that could expand and react to changes.
It's sort of how cities work. They do sort of expand outwards, don't they? Like an organism, in a sense.
Were systems with a permanent core structure and modular, adaptable units that could grow and even.
Oh, you used to have like the capsule hotel, bro. Is this where like the idea of the capsule hotel? Well, obviously it doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. But is this where the idea of it was? Because obviously it's just modules that you add on, right?
Retract like branches and leaves. These proposals were pretty wild. This one had these mega spines that spanned across Tokyo Bay, with residential modules that could be added or sunk depending on the size of the population. This one took a more vertical approach, but again with spines that would allow for these residential capsules to plug into the core. And maybe if Hive Cities were planned from the start with a structure that would guide this crazy growth, we would have ended up with something that's not pure chaos. But at the same time, most of these metabolist projects never actually got built because it was really complex.
Actually, is it called the Capsule Hotel? I can't actually remember what its official name was.
Plug in and plug out seems like a simple enough idea, but it means you need to fabricate them and transport them and deploy a machine to attach them every time they experience some kind of population growth. Meaning, you would need the construction companies, the infrastructure, the regulating bodies, and the transportation system.
Yeah, it sounds like it'd take a lot to maintain, right? It'd probably be a lot of work and probably way too much work than it's worth the hassle, right? And you'd probably have this scenario where people wouldn't want, like, how do you replace units that have got really old if they're like really far in? Because you're not going to be able to move all the units that are on top of it and whatnot, which people wouldn't want to live in those units anymore then, right? The people would want to get the new units. There's a lot of like long-term complications I can see with this, as well as obviously just taking a long ass time constantly with a construction team.
All working together seamlessly. And even for the Japanese, it was too much. And I think we can all agree.
Yeah, the Japanese can't do it, bro. No one can. Like,
the Japanese are the best people in the world.
Construction gurus, bro.
Out of chaos. So imagine how hard it was for these hive people who basically drink recycled pea water every day to try to build something complex like this. In fact, this chaotic and sporadic nature of Hive City might lend itself better to a slightly different concept. Hold on a sec. Let me double check that. I want to take a quick break to show you a free browser that I genuinely love.
Nah, I'm good, bro. Thank you, but no thank you. I don't want no new browser.
Apparently, Hive Cities start their lives around this geothermal core.
Okay.
And very quickly, settlements get built around this core, stacking layer upon layer upon layer. And
that's
as
like the energy,
grow,
right?
They drain these cores, and they eventually deplete the planet at an urban level, because people are just building.
That doesn't sound healthy for the planet,
you
bro.
also get a condition where buildings are built quickly and sporadically, structures attached to each other, or they hang under bridges or factories, which can lead to the collapse of buildings and sometimes.
That's what I was thinking, right?
At the societal level, we have a similar cycle. The poor feed off the scraps that come from above, and the elite, they rely on the labor from below. So Hive Cities is parasitic in nature of its host and in of itself.
No, please stop the buzzing.
And one of the inherent characteristics of parasites is that because they depend on the host for survival, they leech off the host to the point of harm, but not immediate death. And this relentless cycle of exploitation leads to a slow and painful decline. Kind of eerie, right?
So like the Hive City's going to just be destroyed eventually.
Yes, that's a real thing, and it forced our researcher to look at a lot of really gross images on the internet.
Lovely.
It doesn't necessitate the harming of the host. In fact, it has very humanitarian roots. This is one of the first built instances from the
it's like extension, an extension on the house, right?
It's a nursery that hung off the facade of an apartment block because the family couldn't afford a bigger apartment. You know, when you look at a
Okay,
problem in a
that's
city,
interesting.
let's say the housing crisis, and you're like, oh, just build it with this. Why do we have to go through approvals and through these people and these people and just waste so much time? This was an architectural manifestation of
That does
that
not look safe.
frustration. Because these structures could be erected quickly and they typically resisted zoning regulations and bylaws, it was kind of an architectural middle finger to the establishment.
Bro, I would not be
There
sitting
were
in that.
definitely
Like,
stylistic
I could
elements
just
to the
imagine it just
movement, where
collapsing
architects just
through on
tried to
itself.
design structures that were in complete contrast to the host building. But a lot of the projects were also just a hands-on attempt to solve real social problems, like inflatable structures that's made possible by attaching to a building's mechanical exhaust,
Okay.
or using a billboard to act as a partial enclosure for temporary shelters. But can you imagine what cities would have looked like if this trend kind of took off? Actually, I think it'd be kind of cool. Well,
I
in
feel like
Hive
it'd be a lot more
Cities, these
dangerous, more
parasitic
likely,
structures overtake
right?
the host. There's actually
Because like, cause the those extra building, like extra rooms on the outside of the building, like they're not going to be properly structured in to have the proper support and whatnot, right? So like, it'd become really common for them to probably, have accidents caused by them, right? I could only see that happening anyway because the building isn't structured for those extra pieces to be there, so they're not going to have the proper support.
parts of the Warhammer lore that's a reference to this blackout period where this shift could have happened. And with this uncontrolled survival building, the host structure will eventually fail. Apparently,
Yeah.
hive quakes are common instances where complete neighborhoods are just smashed under the sheer weight of these
That's what I
parasitic
thought might
modules,
have happened. Yeah,
killing
okay.
hundreds of thousands of people at once. So hive
Yeah,
cities
that's
embody a paradox.
like,
The more they grow, the more they implode under their own weight. In biology, there's this phenomenon called autophagy.
that,
It's a process where
it's literally like a ticking time bomb just waiting to happen, bro. Wow, that's big yikers.
cells break down and
I
consume
was
its
sort of
own
hoping that
tissue,
they had a
often
solution,
in
but
response to
evidently
stress,
not.
starvation, or disease. But this self-feeding mechanism is a survival tactic, and it's essential for it to clear out the damaged parts and continue sustaining itself.
It's interesting though. It's interesting.
Hive cities echo lots of positive urban concepts, but in the context of survival, it's morphed into something dark and twisted. It
Yeah,
reminds me of this economic theory called the tragedy of the commons. Imagine a small, lush
like definitely. Like I could see how these new constructs, like the lion that we're trying to build, how they could easily, go down a much darker route and end up more like these hive cities in Warhammer for sure. Like, it wouldn't take much, really, would it, for them to really take this sort of like dark turn at all?
pasture with 3 happy sheep. As soon as you introduce a couple more, though, they start to eat more grass, there's more poop on the land, and the pasture, or the common land, it gradually degrades. This affects all the sheep, even the ones that were thriving before. And if
Hmm.
this continues, the entire system will collapse. The tragedy is that in most cases, when people are just trying to survive, they have no choice but to consume more than their neighbors. And I think it's made even more tragic because it speaks to a primal human instinct. And Hive City is the architectural manifestation of this theory. But according to
Yeah.
Sam Altman, we're entering this age of abundance where all of our basic needs are going to be covered and AI is going to provide everything we need. Maybe we're not
Mm,
even going to have to fight for
I
resources,
don't know about that, Chief.
separating us even further from our instincts for survival. But
It depends how soon they're talking. What is the reference for soon here? Because to some people, soon is in the next 1,000 years. Soon is in the next 10. Soon is next year, next week. You know what I mean? Like, what's the reference for soon here? Because I can't see AI being that complex in pretty much most people's that are around now's lifetime, or maybe towards the end of their lifetime. Maybe that's if AI becomes capable of doing these things. We still don't know full capabilities of it, right? think that's some sort of wishful thinking for sure.
As we become more and more reliant on this technology, what happens if AI decides to stop helping us? Will our
That would
instincts
be
come
very
back?
typical.
Maybe even stronger than before. Even stronger than before. Even stronger than before. Even stronger than before. Even stronger.
Even stronger than before, boys. Even stronger than before. No, yeah, like it's an interesting video, honestly. Like you could easily see, like, if they're successful in the sort of structures they wanted to build for large amounts of people, how very quickly it could go south and become like the Hive Cities in 40k for sure. You could definitely see the inner linkings there. Probably not to obviously the scale of Hive Cities, but definitely to a lesser scale, right? But yeah, interesting video for sure. Let's hope it doesn't happen, right?